Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Board Gaming Doctor. My name is Phil, and I'll be your Board Game Doctor today. In this episode, I go over my first impressions of Wyrmspan, a 2024 release designed by Connie Vogelman, developed by Elizabeth Hargrave, of course, art by Clementine Campardo, published by Stonemaier Games, and this game is for 1 to 5 players, played in about 90 minutes. Its weight, complexity, is a 2.7 out of 5, and right now it is overall ranked 2,513 with an average rating of 7.9 out of 10 on Board Game Geek. So, what makes this game good and unique? First, the cards. There are 183 dragon cards to play from, boasting a wide variety just like its predecessor, adding to endless variability and replayability. In addition, you have 75 cave cards that also have individual abilities when you play them, so essentially you're working with over 200 cards to mix and match effects with for engine building. One-time effects and endgame objectives are thrown in as well. Second is theme. This game not only features dragons as the theme of the game, but goes into a lot of work to create a mythos, as it were, for each of these dragons. While in Wyrmspan, the bird flavor text and even their abilities on their cards are drawn from real-life facts about those birds, it was as if the dragons in Wyrmspan had abilities assigned to them and created, and then the lore of each of these dragons was described and created after the fact. It's quite the feat to world build these dragons, as it were, and include that in a kind of a bestiary separately found within the game box. Third is familiarity. Of course, since this game is based on Wyrmspan, many people, both veteran hobby board gamers and the more casual gamer, will be able to grasp the mechanisms and game flow if they are familiar with how Wyrmspan plays. It's easier to teach the game, and the game time may be quickened because of previous experiences with Wyrmspan, which may lead to a more enjoyable first play and subsequent plays. For game comparisons, I've personally compared Wyrmspan to many other games in the past on the channel, to include popular games like Ark Nova, Terraforming Mars, Earth, Agricola even, and etc. So let's set those aside and just talk about these similarities and differences between Wyrmspan and Wyrmspan. First is the action selection. Instead of, as in Wyrmspan, where you start with 8 action cubes and round by round dwindle down to 5, in Wyrmspan you start with each round with 6 coins to spend on actions. You can, by card abilities, gain or lose coins, but otherwise it stays pretty consistent throughout the game. Second is the engine building aspect. Disregarding the directionality of how the engines are set off in each respective game, Wyrmspan offers the chance to fire off the abilities of each bird card in a row when you take the action pertaining to that row. In Wyrmspan, you take a completely separate action to fire off that engine in a row, and the cost to utilize that row increases each time you do so in each round, spending precious eggs to do so. Third is the Dragon Guild. Wyrmspan offers a separate board, not seen in the base game of Wyrmspan at least, where you advance on a circular track called the Dragon Guild, obtaining rewards as you go along, and occasionally you are able to place cubes in a central board to obtain immediate benefits and resources, as well as participating in endgame scoring. Think of this as a replacement to the objective cards from Wyrmspan. There are 4 different guilds that you can play with, adding variety to the game. Fourth is the resources. There is no dice tower and randomness with the dice with the resources in Wyrmspan. You basically get resources from cards advancing on the top row of your player board, and occasionally from the Dragon Guild. And then finally, from what little I've seen so far, there are some dragon card abilities that seem unique compared to Wyrmspan, for example, abilities that pertain to orthogonal adjacency of dragon cards, and obviously interactions with the cave cards, which are unique to this game. Otherwise, the overall gist of the cards, end of round scoring, and even the Automa solo play are very similar, if not the same, as compared to Wyrmspan. For peer review, there has been a lot of hype and comments made about this game, both on Board Game Geek and otherwise. So let's see what people have said, particularly on Board Game Geek in the comments section, now that the game has had some time to be released and played by the general public. For praise, folks who highly rate the game, first of all, like the theme. They like the artwork and the very smooth gameplay, the additional complexity of the cave cards and the Dragon Guild. The solo play, for some, has been easier and better than the one found in Wyrmspan. They feel like the decision space is improved, which I interpret as having the ability to play cards from your hand faster and not having that slow burn and that ramp up as you do in Wyrmspan. For people who do not give it such a high rating, they have some concerns and criticisms, and they are as follows. For some, they mentioned that they did not like the reskinning of Wyrmspan, especially with a theme that is not grounded in real life. The theme of Wyrmspan is definitely polarizing in the community, with some enjoying it and some who don't. Some people feel that the strategy is somewhat linear in Wyrmspan, whereas in Wyrmspan, especially in the base game, getting eggs was a pretty good strategy and seemed to be pretty dominant until you got into some of the expansions. While here in Wyrmspan, filling out rows as quickly as possible to some feels like the dominant strategy here, and therefore that the diversity in decision spaces and strategy is lacking. Some people don't like how long it takes to get things going in your rows as well. Having to play cave cards onto your board before playing your dragon cards, it just seemed a little like an extra effort that is clunky compared to just playing birds onto your tableau in Wyrmspan. Finally, while the resource randomness is quote-unquote fixed in Wyrmspan, some people did not feel like it was dynamic enough or robust enough to feel fun or thematic as it was in Wyrmspan. In conclusion, and my final thoughts for my impressions on Wyrmspan, first of all, I'm a big fan of Wyrmspan, and so it was intriguing for me to play this new re-implementation, and I do admit I was a little skeptical coming into it. I do enjoy the differences this game offers with the straightforward resource gathering without the randomness of the dice. The neat 2-card interactions with the caves and dragons was really neat. There were times when I needed some eggs to continue exploring or to play dragons, and having those cave cards to excavate pulled me through some of those tight spaces, so I liked the variety that they offer for gameplay and tactical strategy. I'm less of a fan of the Dragon Guild track because it is essentially a track, and I would rather have the objective cards to play around in my hand rather than a simple track to advance on. Although I do like the race to obtain the benefits and the scoring from the track, as if you do advance faster than others, you may be able to snatch some of those opportunities in front of others. So I think this is a great game because it builds off of a formula that is tried and true and adds some more complexity to make it feel different enough. It's kind of like how I feel about Agricola and Caverna, the differences between those two base games, or even other Rosenberg games that changed the game dramatically through expansions, like the Norwegians did for A Feast for Odin, and Farmers of the Moor did for Agricola. On that similar note, Wyrmspan has many expansions for it already, with more to come. With the release of Oceania, for example, the game boards were fixed to alleviate the egg dominant strategy, and after playing it recently with the Oceania and other expansions, of course, I noticed that it was a lot easier to mitigate the randomness of the dice, not only with the wild nectar resource, but with the card effects to cycle through the food. The question that I'm left with is, well, I like Wyrmspan a lot, so is there room on my shelf for Wyrmspan? Unfortunately, the answer for me is no, especially since I own the expansions to Wyrmspan, all of them, in fact, and with that all culminating together, I feel like it offers the same complexity as Wyrmspan does, albeit with some differences here and there. I would miss the cave and dragon card combos the most, but overall I think I just get as much, if not more, enjoyment from Wyrmspan strategically on one part when you add in all the complexities that the expansions include, but because I think I also enjoy the more of a slow burn at the beginning of Wyrmspan, having 8 actions to build up your engine slowly, and having it becoming increasingly tighter as you finish the game with less actions, and then firing off those big engine combos at the end. Of course, Wyrmspan felt the same throughout, despite the increasing engine building, and you do have those big combo-driven engine fire-offs in Wyrmspan as well, and so there are some similarities there. But I am more drawn to the theme of birds, which I think does help me feel grounded. In Wyrmspan, it also helps me return to Wyrmspan more often. I feel like I have more of a personal connection to it, rather than the mythical dragons that are depicted in Wyrmspan. Anytime I'm walking through the park with my children, or when I look outside my window, I see birds flying around and doing what they do. And when I think of them and see them, I kind of feel a tug to pull out Wyrmspan again and just enjoy the coziness of the theme. I know for some the theme of Wyrmspan does not make sense when you translate it to gameplay, but the artwork and the overall aesthetic of the game really appeals to me. So that, coupled with the strategic depth that the expansions have added to the game, fixing I think a few things here and there, make Wyrmspan my preferred game over Wyrmspan. However, this game, Wyrmspan, is a solid game, and I feel like many people are going to enjoy it and will enjoy it for years to come. So, those are my first impressions on Wyrmspan. Thank you for consulting with us today, and hope you schedule an appointment with us real soon. Take care.